I want to take us back to our poll results, if possible. I believe that most of our poll results revealed that many of us have some familiarity with community review boards, but have not exactly had the opportunity to serve on any. But by and large, most of us agree that community review boards have earned a role in reviewing policing policy. Um, our panelists have certainly done their diligence with introducing and orienting us to community review boards and their power. So right now, we want to invite you to switch roles for just a moment through an interactive case study. But before we review the case study, I certainly want to caution you around the content in the upcoming case study. The upcoming case study does contain material of a sensitive nature. And so we invite you to decide how you would like to participate moving forward. Next slide, please. All right. So our case study explores an officer has shot an unarmed citizen of color, resulting in the death of that citizen. Cell phone footage of the shooting has been circulating all over social media. The community has been protesting and calling for this officer to be fired, and the victim's family has filed a complaint. The officer has been on duty for about 5 years, and she is asserting that she responded appropriately and has been trained on what she was trained to do. And there's body camera footage of the shooting, but department policy is that it's not to be released until after the department investigation has been completed. Officer-involved shootings are investigated by an internal affairs unit within the department where the officer is employed. A community oversight board that is staffed by 2 citizen volunteers, 1 retired police officer, 1 mayoral appointee will review the investigation results. The oversight board has no authority to conduct investigations of its own. Hearings of the Community Oversight Board are closed, but their findings are shared with the public. Disciplinary recommendations and action, if any, are not shared with the public. And so what we would like for you to do in this next activity is, like I said, we want you to switch roles for a moment, and we want you to envision and position yourself as one of the participants on this community oversight board, given the details of the case study. And through just thinking about what decisions, what recommendations on policy that you would offer up, we want you to be able to participate either through the chat, or through another interactive tool that we're going to be sharing in just a moment, called Padlet. Some of you may be familiar with it. I'm going to drop the link in the chat. Just a second. Here we go. Uh-oh, sorry. Let me see. That wasn't. Got to switch over to everybody so that everybody sees this. Hang on one moment.
So while Maisha is getting that set up, just to recap what's going to be happening here is you're going to get a link that's in the chat right now, and we're going to invite you to click on that link, and it's going to take you to an external site. And on this site, you're going to get to type your responses as if you were on this review board. Are you all ready to continue the instructions, Maisha?
I'm ready. All right. So the link is in the chat, and once you're over there, you should see like a map, and it will say at the top, there's a title that says Community and Citizen Review Board Recommendations. And as Rachel just oriented you and just gave you beautiful instructions, you are going to share on the Padlet, type in what your recommendation would be based on the details of this particular case study. What would you offer up for policy? And you can share it on the Padlet, or you can share it in the chat, whichever your preference is.
We do ask if you're going to share it in the chat to not hit enter right away. So let's give everyone a chance to get their ideas recorded. And if you're on Padlet, you're going to click that blue, I'm sorry, it's not blue, it's red, a red plus sign down on the bottom right-hand side. And it's going to pop up a little thing that looks like a Post-it note for you. Only you will be able to see what you're typing until after you post it. So if everyone can choose their way of interacting there, if you're a pen and paper person, you can even write your response on a piece of paper, and when we're ready, you can just hold it up. So 3 different ways to engage, but what thoughts do you have about the case that's before you? If you're a community review board, what feedback or suggestions might you offer about that process? So we'll give you a minute, maybe 2, to get your thoughts recorded. Once again, if you're recording something in chat, don't hit the enter right away. Let's give everyone a chance to get something recorded.
Wonderful. We see some, you may see an update button right at the top of your Padlet to actually post it.
I'm going to go with a musical interlude. Another minute or so.
Okay, and anyone who decided to participate via the chat, if you are ready to enter your responses and contributions, you may do so now. Wonderful. Thank you all. All right, so what we would like to do now is we'd like to review some of the contributions that everyone has shared with our space, within our space today. And I would like to pull Dr. Jones and even Satchel back in to review some of the contributions of our audience so that we can have a discussion about how these contributions may contribute or may fit into the context of a community review board based on your experience. All right.
While our presenters are looking over the post-its there on Padlet, as well as the comments in the chat, I just want to offer a way of opening up our conversation to say that the first thing that occurred to me is, Satchel, you have nothing to apologize for. I mean, the work that you've done has been so amazing, and it really shows the power of citizenship, right? That if you hadn't taken it up, it likely wouldn't have become part of anyone's conversation. And so, you know, just really thinking about both what a review board might do in a more formal way, but also the responsibility of individuals as citizens to really pay attention to what we're using to train our civil servants with, I think is an important takeaway for me.
I absolutely agree. And these are some very good responses here on the case study. It seems like we're getting them into a couple of buckets, with two saying that there should be a protest, a couple talking about the transparency of the board. It needs to be, you know, a transparent board. And then I saw one that said somebody needs to take the police officer should be placed on leave. I can't find that now. Maybe that was in the chat box. Oh yes, that was in the chat box. So now I think all of these are great responses to the situation. You know, one of the things that we know with oversight boards is some cities, some municipalities and counties, they create oversight boards just to say that they have created an oversight board. And a key element of an oversight board is to afford that board the opportunity to conduct investigations. So if there is no investigatory powers within the board, and then there are no transparency on the hearings, it's nothing more than lip service, right? There's no point of that board. And so I think that is a key element here. And definitely, I think we would probably need some more information in terms of body cam footage, any footage from bystanders, you know, getting a report from the coroners. You know, I'd be interested to see the trajectory of the bullets, where they entered, where they exited, or if they're still there, the context of the situation. And then definitely not just suspending the officer, because officers are suspended all the time, but it is that element, I think, that was mentioned in the chat of suspending without pay. I think that's key, because oftentimes when there is a police involved shooting, it's mandatory that the officer is placed on leave. It's not mandatory that they're placed on leave without pay. I would add one more thing to that, that I would hope that the officer would have a required drug screen, because oftentimes when there are police involved shootings, the officers are not mandated to go to a drug screen. Whereas if you were to work on any other job and something happened, they would tell you right then and there, stop what you're doing, go right on over, take a drug test. And so that's some of my feedback, but I think these are all great comments.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Jones. That actually takes me to I have a question, or opening up the stage for questions. You're speaking to just sort of this performative nature of many of the districts and in counties and such. So what would you recommend in terms of the power of a review board to kind of move past this sort of performative kind of stance, so that there's actual, so that they move the work, and so that there's action that really follows up behind, and really sort of take on that sort of what you mentioned, the investigatory power that you emphasize as being very critical to the core of a body like this.
Yeah, so I would direct everybody on this call to check out NACOLE, NACOLE.org. It's the National Association of Civilian Oversight and Law Enforcement, or something like that. They have a long title. But they provide several different models for police oversight boards or civilian review boards. And in order to change the powers of a police oversight board, it actually depends on how that board was established, right? So if it was something that was established in the charter of a municipality, then you would have to take that to a vote. So then you would need to put that on the ballot. And so we would call that a ballot initiative. You would need to get a certain amount of signatures to make those changes and put it on there. I would also say write to your elected officials. So if you have a city council, if you have a mayor, county commissioners, and if they established it just through like an executive order or just, you know, something that the city council, because they pass all kinds of things, you know, all the time, then if there needs to be a revision, then they can do that on a whim, but you have to figure out how that was, how it was established too. And so I think understanding how the board was established can then inform how you change it if there aren't investigatory powers with the board. So I think that's a critical piece of it, but oftentimes civilian review boards are established through a charter element, or they're established through some kind of a legislative effort. And so in order to change that legislative effort, it has to go to the ballot. So it's just incumbent on everybody to know what your laws are and then what that getting a ballot issue process looks like for your particular area.
Thank you for that. If there are other questions that the audience has, we'll take them. You can unmute yourself or you can drop it in the chat so that we can continue to learn from our dynamic panelists. They have so much to offer.
This is Anyanu Cox. This is just really kind of a comment. I took the decided to go back and review a little bit on the history of police, in America, with the work of Dr. Joy DeGruy. You know her. She's a PhD researcher, social worker, psychologist, and there was also a policeman, also a PhD researcher who had been a policeman for a lot of years. And but anyway, one of the things they found went along with what Satchel had talked about, is that the very beginning and the birth of police in this nation really was around what Satchel was talking about. And so I really like what you both are doing. I like the fact, Chanel, that I think most of all, what's built in, what's already baked into the system is that FOP you mentioned. Is that what it's called? Yeah, I think that almost could be a box 10 times bigger than the rest of them, because according to them, it's really the birth of it led to, well, it started out, of course, as just basic laws to make sure that African Americans were kept in check like over 100 years ago. So when they wound up putting this together, it's not even just simply trying to educate individuals, but the whole system is pretty much jacked up, excuse the word. But and of course, with the gray uniforms and all that, man, that was really something. So I think that even with Satchel being the one to bring that forth, I'm not sure if someone else brought all that forth, if it would have been handled the same way. So I think everybody has their lane and what they're in, and I think you're both doing excellent work. They talked about the fact too that I didn't know that even though the police unions are a nonprofit, they're not nonprofit like a 501c3, because 501c3s are their mission is to really look out for the community and citizens. The 5014, I think it is, their job is to take care of those in-house, and so everything they do is for the police, by the police, and really not for the community. So they already baked in their whole intention. And so anyway, you got your hands full, you got youth on your side, and so blessings to you both.
Thank you. And I want to say, because Satchel, in the chat, you brought up a really good point that I didn't touch on either, because I was running out of time, but it was about how officers are trained, right? They're the good guy. Everybody else is the bad guy. And then the key word that I always hear in training is you make sure you get home safely, Don't worry about anybody else, but you make sure you get home safely. And you put in there, like, you know, what kind of culture is that when everybody else is perceived as the enemy, right? That's not what policing should be. So I just wanted to highlight that and say that you were right on point with mentioning that in the chat.
Yep, and people are naturally averse to killing others. That's not something many people want to do at all. You have to be trained to do that. And many of the policing theories are designed around how to train officers to be more willing to kill people. And, you know, officers are put in dangerous situations. Sometimes maybe that's something you'd have to do as a very, very last resort. But the way the trainings are happening now, some of them are emphasizing that as the first thing you should be thinking about.
There are a couple of comments and questions that have come up in the chat.
Darcy has a question. I think there's a question about if one has information regarding lack of reporting on behalf of police when it comes to hate crimes, what's the best process for escalating that when the local elected officials and papers are less than compliant?
Well, I think that the Kentucky State Police, they weren't responsive to our open records requests or our requests for comments until we said we're publishing that article tomorrow at noon. If you want to comment, you're going to email us or call us by then and say what you want to say or not. I think they thought they might be able to get away with it. Maybe we'd give up on the story if they didn't comment on it. We're just student journalists. We couldn't write anything too bad that would get the attention of the governor and everything. But I think showing that the persistence there and that it's going to get done. And the Kentucky has strong open records laws, although this session of our state legislature, among other things, they tried to gut some of that, which is unfortunate, as well as saying that passing a bill is saying you can't criticize the police or in a manner that would provoke violent reaction in a reasonable person, although that's an entirely separate conversation, what they're trying to do there. But I think showing the institutions that we're not going to take their word for everything. You know, the first time I emailed them, they said, oh yes, we think this was just used one time. And there was just 1 year that we quoted Hitler, and the spokesperson said, well, we tried to represent the values of the Kentucky State Police or something ridiculous like that. And you have to show them and that you're not going to take their word for that when they were actually used 3 years of Hitler quoting and 10 years of Robert E. Lee.
Just add to what Satchel is saying here. So if you have about the lack of reporting of police, I just want to make sure everybody is aware that the FBI collects data. They publish it annually. I believe it's hate crimes in the United States. There's also the UCR, which is a Uniform Crime Report, which has been transitioned into NIBRS, the National Incident-Based Reporting System. And one of the key elements about all of those databases is that just police departments are not required to report. That's another issue with the system. So when we talk about crimes that happen, hate crimes that happen, there's always an undercount because police departments are not mandated to provide that information. They do it voluntarily because they want some kind of way of just tracking things if they so desire. And so if you know of hate crimes that are happening, if you know that they are being underreported, and of course we want to bring all of that stuff to light, I lean to the side of using the media. So, like Satchel wrote his article and whatnot, I would say, get it on your news, write an article. You can even self-publish these days, but figure out some kind of way to put it. Heck, you can even do, 240 character tweet, put it in there, send it out, and watch. Before you know it, it'll probably go viral. And so I think just if you have that information, lean into putting it out there as much as you can using the platforms that are available to you. So that way we can start to bring light and attention to, you know, this information that you have and what's going on.
You bring up, I'm sorry, go ahead, Dr. Watson.
Yeah, just a question. You know, the cynic in me, right? So I just want to kind of put this out here. When we make an open records request and we get the information that Satchel has gotten, or, you know, if you're working with a policing agency or law enforcement agency and you get wind of something, I guess I found myself wondering, wouldn't they just change it so that it wouldn't be there? They continue to use it. It continues to be part of the culture, but it's not as visible. And so I wonder if there is a role in terms of the citizen review, either boards or commissions or individuals, that goes beyond just what are you using as the materials that are used to train to train officers, but also kind of gets at some of those questions about, and what values are you trying to impart or to train them into? What is the culture that you're getting into? So it's kind of a windy question there, but I guess the question is, are we sure that it isn't still being used and just it's sort of gone a little bit more underground? And how do we get at that if we think that there's still more to find?
I can start with that then. You know, I doubt that there are still Hitler quotes in the Kentucky State Police trainings, but you're right. You never know. The Kentucky State Police are who are we going to call if they don't answer our open record requests, right? But I think it did show a consequence when the commissioner of the Kentucky State Police had to resign over it. But what was the other point I had? But some of the ideas expressed in that slideshow, and there's more of it that's atrocious and expresses some ideas about being violent, being manly over policy, all that about how you need to be ready to kill at any moment. Those ideas, that killology theory by Dave Grossman, very prominent police trainer, all that's still out there and is being taught. We know that. And that's a theory that's still being trained to police officers today, that they need to be ready and look at everyone as the enemy.
I would just add to it, you know, there's something to be said about doing training audits, which should be happening at the department level for every police department. And if there is not, then that's a whole nother concern. And so when these audits happen, then there should be a thorough assessment of what types of materials are being used. Our Division of Police just went through one as part of an entire, we hired Matrix Consulting to come in, and they worked hand in hand with me and some other, a group of people. We formed, well, we were appointed to the Columbus Community Safety Advisory Commission. And so what we did was we went through all the training modules, materials, their hiring process, recruiting process, literally every aspect of the Division of Police that you can possibly think about. And then we issued about 140 recommendations. That was in addition to, and working alongside in tandem with Matrix Consulting, which was the consulting group that came in and also did an internal audit to assess. So that the recommendations basically paralleled each other. We identified and uncovered the same things. And so I think there is something to be said about requiring departments to go through that internal audit process. There should be some sort of state board. So I'll use Ohio again. We have OPATA, which is the Ohio Peace Officer Training Academy, which sets the curriculum for all of the police departments throughout the state. But then we also have the Office of Criminal Justice Services. And so the Office of Criminal Justice Services then basically certifies different law enforcement agencies as they meet competencies or levels. It's kind of like an accreditation for police officers and police departments throughout the state. And so I think, you know, if states are missing that element, like an accreditation, some kind of accreditation, even if it's just through a statewide, you know, entity, and what that looks like, as well as the audit, then there may be the opportunity for them to just kind of skirt that stuff under the rug. But once it is audited, that will come to light. And so that's how you continue to address it.
And Dr. Watson, can I throw in one little thing?
Yes,
Oh,
please.
okay. One of the things there are people I know around the country doing this work around the history, because I think along with what you're asking, I think you have the level where like we're doing the audit, or we're weeding out those who are undesirable. But I think there's another piece to it. It's kind of like with healthcare, you have the treatment and you have the prevention. And so one of the things I don't know, somehow the universities, I think, can play a part, and probably even high schools, and teaching the history. What is the history of police? What is the history of systemic racism? Because some of the people, not that I necessarily feel sorry for anybody, but I mean, the idea that sometimes they're coming out of a training, out of an indoctrination, where they don't even get that there's a problem with it. So we know from history that a group, I think they're called, don't quote me, but I think they're called the Daughters of the Confederate. They sat down and purposely put together, as Chanel was saying, misinformation to support the fact that their brothers and fathers and sons died in the Civil War. And they passed it on and made it required reading. They put a lot of money behind it. So as the years went on, their children and children's children had to read, study, and live up to what was in there. So a lot of these folks, I'm sure, are police now, because it was so they're the ones that put the statues up and all that. So they put a very what is it? A whole culture together, and it's everywhere. And so kind of penalizing people at the end point. I mean, you have to kind of do that, but I think if the universities, those of you who are doing this academic work, to really put in their history, going back to the history, look at the Daughters of the Confederate, look at the policing, look at some of Dr. DeGrew's work, and the policeman. I wrote his name down. He actually started something. He has a PhD research. He talked about how they have the history of it, and how it began, and so it's baked in, and so people are acting on what they think are the best practices, really. We may disagree, but so changing that, I think, is with history. Several people are doing work around giving history to people who have didn't even know they were racist, and they're finding out it's very effective to give people the facts about how it all started. So that's just a suggestion, but I know universities, and I know all of you are, I'm seeing your PhDs and pre-PhDs and all that, you're all primed to really deliver. They said those who forget their history are doomed to repeat it. Go way, 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 way back into the history of the night riders and those who had to be out there policing, and even the early Black policemen who could not carry guns or were not allowed to arrest white people. They could only kind of walk around and parade and stuff. Go all the way back and bring that into us in some of the training. So, because some of the young people, men and women, I think if they knew the truth, I think they do differently. Some of them, anyway.
I agree with what you're saying. And as a matter of fact, in the chat earlier, if you scroll up, I put an article in there that I wrote back in 2013, and it focused on the title of it was "The System Isn't Broken; It Was Designed That Way." So basically, what I do is take the readers through the history of policing and the criminal justice system in America, starting from slave patrols to slave codes to Black codes to the anti-lynching laws and the lynching laws and the convict leasing system, and then I go into the Jim Crow laws, because all of this stuff, it just recreates itself.
Excellent.
Right? So then I get into the Jim Crow laws, and then I get into the war on drugs, and then I get into the extrajudicial killing of Black men and women throughout the United States. So it kind of takes everybody through a historical past, 400 and plus years in a matter of a couple of pages. But I think that hits on exactly what you're saying, because policing was birthed out of slave patrols, right, where the ultimate goal initially was to catch runaway slaves, get them back to their plantation, and they did that by any means necessary at the time. And so I think that is critical, that people who are currently police officers have a basic foundational knowledge or something of, you're stepping into a system that was birthed out of hatred and racism and bigotry and discrimination. And so understanding that, so that way they can be more mindful of how they police. And then, so one of the things that we did was we created it's like a training. It's called The History of Race and Policing in the United States for Law Enforcement Personnel, that sort of takes them through that. And then, but we don't just deal with the history. We also, because people, I've done trainings on implicit bias and racism and stuff across the country a million times. And it's in how you deliver, because usually when you start to talk to a group of people with that past, that means they've been the perpetuators of slavery and hatred and all that, they start to build up a wall. And they don't want to receive the information. So, we had to come up with a way to, present it in such a way that it doesn't belittle or diminish them. This is what Black people do all the time. So it doesn't belittle or diminish them, but it opens up the door for them to understand how that past impacts how people receive policing, how we perceive policing, and how police officers police today. So great points that you just made.
Excellent. One last little tidbit, because we did do a course, and the way we got around them feeling like we were attacking them, it was their homework. So they came to the table with their own research about that history. And after the class was over, we still get emails of people researching about the history and sending it. And so they didn't, they were able to not have to go in that place, because we didn't like push it out. And we were like, okay, here's your homework. And so they brought it back to the table. Thank you so much. That's excellent.
Can I add a little bit to the conversation?
Certainly, Mr. Rogers.
Sure. The only thing I wanted to add, I know as we move forward, we tend to focus a lot on the officers and the people on the front line. I was in law enforcement for about 25 years, and I worked my way up from a buck private ranger clerk to a chief. And I'm hoping that you don't lose sight that you need to focus on the hierarchy. You need to focus on the chiefs. You need to focus on the managers, because many times the cops, they're in the streets, they're being allowed to do the things that they do, and sometimes they're directed to do it. And then we go after them, but the chiefs are still have the same policies. And I know when you talked about how people were trained in the past, I was trained, over 25 years ago. And I can tell you, I was never trained to shoot an unarmed person. That was it was bad. And that kind of stuff has changed. And the police are kind of like a paramilitary group, where they're almost like a gang. Like they have peer pressure, and they pull together and they push them in certain directions. And if a bad apple or bad element isn't rooted out all the way to the top, you're going to have a hard time changing it, because a lot of those officers are either doing what they're told, or they're acting within certain confines. When they're saying, I fear for my life, and that's all they have to say, well, that's what they're going to do. But if you change that standard, then they're going to change your behavior. You hold them accountable to it. So that's all I would add is, as you're doing your studies, as you're moving forward, have some focus on the hierarchy, on the chiefs, the lieutenants, and the people higher up, because I know that when I was very diligent about dealing with the Rangers, they changed. They did change. Their behavior changed. When I left, they went back. But I can tell you, while I was there, as long as they knew I was serious and I was going to hold them accountable, no matter how they felt about who they felt about, they didn't act that way. They stopped.
Thank you so much for that, Mr. Rogers. We agree. I echo everything that you said. I think it will take a top down, bottom up, reaching out to the sides, a holistic approach, really to get to really sort of to change the narrative and to change the practices that we've been reliving and we've been living for too long. And I also want to be considerate of everyone's time and thank our panelists again for such a rich and dynamic presentation, and just offering so much food for thought. And in the times that we're living in, it was just a timely conversation, and very much needed for the times that we're living in. And I want to call the attention to an initiative that is being pushed forward through State Senator Art Haywood's office, an initiative called Fix the Six. And these are the initiatives that they are focusing on in conjunction with much of the conversation that we've been having tonight, and that has bordered along the series of our community dialogue series. And if you